Got it. There we go. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a most unusual topic. I've never heard of this anywhere else, so I'm rather keen. And I think the last look there were, yes, 28 people here. So obviously never heard of it either. So look forward to it, Michele, and all yours.
Awesome, thank you. Right now, screen sharing is disabled.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that, Michele, because I've actually set it up to one participant can share. I'll change it to multiple and see what happens.
Okay.
Right, I've set it to multiple participants can share. Can you try that and see if it works?
Ah, that works. Very good. Okay, let me set up my...
Right, yep.
Let me do this. Slideshow, there we go. Well, I think it's a good thing that you've not seen one of these before, because now I don't have to be compared to that other guy that did such a great job. Thank you all for participating today and for your interest or willingness to be interested in typewriter philately. This is a topic that you will discover along the way, my reasoning for collecting. But I wanted to, this was my first topic really, and it has become, although I do collect many topics, many more every day sometimes, but I found this one really fascinating. I love the history of it. I love the imagery, and I happen to really love typewriters. So this became a lot of fun for me. Now, I am going to share a little bit here by way of preview, some of the things that we're going to discuss in the next 35, 40 minutes or so. I'm going to talk specifically about the range of materials in this thematic collection. We'll go a little bit into the history of the early typewriter. It is a huge topic, as I said earlier, so of course, this is not going to be an in-depth look at the history of typewriters, but we're going to hit some highlights in the early history, and then next we'll talk about how the typewriter impacted communication around the globe. And finally, the use of typewriters on stamps and other philately today, and how the image of the typewriter is represented. So let's take a look at some of those things. And let's start with the range of materials. Now, of course, there are stamps in different varieties. You see a French stamp here from 2020. This was honoring Frederick Dard, who was an author. And I really loved this. It was a mini sheet with about 12 stamps on it. And this is the top of the mini sheet because the margin, the selvage included a typewriter as well. And so I wanted that selvage. And some of you in your topical collections may collect a stamp because the item for your topic is on the stamp itself. And you will not collect it if it's in the selvage, but in my world, if there's a typewriter on there, it counts. And so this one has both. You will see this wonderful Hong Kong issue from 2012. This was one of a series of 6 stamps showing the evolution of communication. And it starts out with a quill pen and ends up with a QR code on the 6th stamp. And of course, in between there was this lovely typewriter. Here is a wonderful souvenir sheet. This is from Costa Rica from 2016. And this is an example of the typewriter not being on the stamp, but the mini sheet honored national writers of Costa Rica and included this wonderful typewriter in the selvage. And so of course, I added it to the collection. And these two are not stamps per se. These are poster stamps. They're really advertising material, but I am discovering that there are quite a few very interesting poster stamps that feature typewriters, and some of these are some earlier ones that I've picked up along the way. You're going to see some others later in the presentation. Now, as we also look at range of materials, there are covers. Now, you saw a wonderful old commercial cover at the beginning. This is a first day cover here.
That's
from
it. On there, the actual
People turn their mute themselves.
This of them just, it was the
the
bar.
host may be able to mute any of
I
us.
just switched it back on.
Well, I'm going to keep going. We'll hope for the best here. So you see the Serbia 2011 first day cover from the Journalists Association.
If
and
I
I love
can't get it going on there, I'll just give.
Okay. What was I going to say?
I'm coming down at 8 o'clock to watch the what's it.
Hi there. Someone has their microphone on.
No,
We're hearing you talk. Can you mute yourself, please?
I think I've done it now, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so you see the first day cover, and of course there are cancels. This happens to be my favorite author on a typewriter. That's Snoopy, the Peanuts character. He's famous for starting his novel, "It Was a Dark and Stormy Night." I love Snoopy, and this fancy cancel was just perfect with him at the typewriter there with his buddy Woodstock. And then you see meter strips. There are also some interesting meter strips that include typewriters and typewriter advertising. This particular meter strip is a specimen showing a Smith Premier typewriter of the era. This was 1937. So we also see maxi cards, postcards, and ephemera in the range of materials. On the left is a maxi card featuring an Italian 2008 stamp commemorating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Olivetti Typewriter Company. And Italy continued to be very proud of this particular company, and throughout the years it has produced other stamps featuring Olivetti in different ways, and those have all made it part of my collection. This postcard on the right is quite lovely. This is an advertising postcard for the Salter Typewriter Company of Bromwich, West Bromwich actually, touting the only standard typewriter makers in Great Britain. And I love the competitive nature of this. John Bull says, it makes me tired to hear the Yankees talk about typewriters, because essentially he's saying we do it so much better here in Great Britain. And then in terms of ephemera, Jean, one of our members, sent me a link to this particular item with a vendor that she frequents, and this is called an exploded booklet. This was a 1935 stamp booklet that featured advertising. This was a Great Britain stamp booklet, so there were different ads in the booklet, and some of them were typewriter ads. You notice £1 down to be able to commit to this particular Remington portable typewriter. So I promised to tell you how this all started, and here is the artifact that really started it off. This is my mother's Royal portable typewriter circa 1954, and I still have this typewriter. My mom owned this typewriter, and it was sitting in the house, and it was the summertime between my 5th and 6th grade year of school, and I was bored, and I was looking for something to do. I found my mother's typewriter and her old high school typing manual that she used in typing class as a high schooler. And I thought, I'm going to teach myself to type. And that's exactly what I did over that summer. Every day, 3 or 4 lessons a day, I would type my way through the booklet. And by the end of the summer, I typed everything I could get my hands on. And from that day forward, except for maths, I typed all of my homework and turned it in. I love typing. And so I am very proud to continue to own this lovely portable typewriter. So once I realized that, wow, there are typewriters on stamps. When I discovered that, I thought, how many are there? Well, the American Topical Association offers many services, and one of them is checklists. ATA has more than 1,600 checklists, 1,600 topics that have checklists in nearly 50 categories. And of course, checklist number 751, typewriters. So I picked that up to get me started. And well, I don't have them all yet. Still looking for some. But another book that ATA produced called What's First gave me a clue about the very first typewriter stamp. And that was this 1935 Turkey stamp featuring the Women's International Alliance to the 12th Congress of the Women's International Alliance. And here it features a woman at a typewriter. And so I picked this one up. There's a whole set of stamps that go with this. And so I tend to buy the whole set because it's really hard to buy mint, never hinged, one stamp out of a set. So I have lots of sets in order to get the stamp I'm really looking for. But I love this early one, 1935. This is the first one, but there have been many since. So let's take a look at some of the early typewriters that existed. And this shows some of the, this shows an inventor of one of the early attempts at typewriters. This particular mini sheet from Austria was issued in 2017. And what is interesting for me about it is that not only did it show Peter Mitterhofer, who was that inventor, and that is him depicted here, and one of his 5 prototypes that he eventually created, but you'll also notice in the selvage lots of interesting other typewriters, not Mitterhofer's typewriters, but it gives you kind of a look at early typewriters all in that one sheet. Now, Austria was very proud of this inventor, this son of Austria. And so there are other pieces that commemorate him. You see this fancy cancel here with a bust of Mitterhofer, and this celebrated his 150th birthday. He hailed from a South Tyrolean village about 100 miles southwest of Innsbruck. And so that is why Innsbruck is where this cancel was stamped. It shows in this maxi card here, his first of 5 prototypes. Now, Mitterhofer was a carpenter by trade and training, learned from his father, also a carpenter. And so his first typewriter, as you can see here, is wooden. It doesn't look very easy to use, but it was a start. And this stamp, also produced by Austria, and you see the proof that I have here, was actually a death centenary issued in 1993. Here is from the Vienna Technology Museum, a postcard showing again that early Mitterhofer typewriter and his prototype number 5, the last in the line that he produced. So here's the thing about Mitterhofer. He was working on these typewriters. He loved to invent things, and he especially liked inventing tools. And that's why the typewriter interested him as a tool to communicate. And he shared that interest eventually. Emperor Franz Joseph, depicted on the stamp here from 1867, became interested in Mitterhofer's work and actually began funding the efforts. And so Mitterhofer kept working on these typewriters, and one after the other, they evolved. But the emperor decided he essentially lost interest. So by the time Mitterhofer got to prototype number 5, pictured here, the last two were metal, not wood. Mitterhofer was able to sell this final prototype to the emperor, but after that, the funding stopped. And when it did, Mitterhofer didn't have the funds to go on with the effort, and so he abandoned that. And that paved the way for American Christopher Latham Scholes, who would create a typewriter that would eventually become known as the Remington Model 1, and that kicked off the commercial typewriter industry. But not before others gave a try. Here's another early typewriter. This, you see this interesting cover commemorating the first patented typewriter. This was a patent created by William Austin Burt. Now, Burt called this piece of equipment the typographer. And in this etching that you see to its right, this sketch shows how Burt tried to demonstrate how it worked. And it was essentially a typewriter that typed one single letter at a time. You would move a dial and it would type one letter, and then you would move the dial and it would type another letter. There was like a swinging lever that could be depressed, and that would make the letter on a roll of paper, think roll of paper towels, and that paper would be under there. And so it would type one letter at a time very slowly on this piece of paper, and then you could pull the paper and tear it off and you'd have this message. Not very fast as typewriters that we think of today would go. Now, another early typewriter came from Denmark, and you see a stamp here in the upper left. This is from a series that Denmark issued in 2015 commemorating Danish inventors, and one of them is Rasmus Malling Hansen. And Hansen created what's called the writing ball. So you see it on the typewriter, and on the far right, you see a postcard showing a picture of the writing ball in a museum there in Denmark. This was a very interesting piece of equipment. The keys are on the top. A typewriter would sit at the table with their hands over this curved ball and type letters. So it was faster than the Burt typographer. Rasmus Malling Hansen continued to work with typists, and the positions of the keys moved as he got feedback from typists about where they should be positioned to increase the speed based on commonality in the use of the letters. He also continued to improve the machine. For example, you see that it has a curved space where paper was loaded, and eventually he added an electromagnetic system that would move the paper as the typist typed on it to generate the message. Now, this is interesting because it was a very popular machine, and it continued to be in use. It was first exhibited in 1873 in Copenhagen, and it was continually used in London as late as 1909. The problem with this machine was that it was built one at a time. And that hand-built one-at-a-time machine meant that anybody who wanted this piece of equipment for their business enterprise or whatever had to wait a long time to get one. And people aren't patient. And so when Latham Scholes came along with his patent that was eventually mass produced, it simply overtook the writing ball because people could get their hands on one of these typewriters. Now, this is a very early model and not the version that was mass produced, but this was the beginning of the commercial typewriter. Christopher Latham Sholes was a newspaper editor and later became a politician. He is the one who really came up with what's called the QWERTY keyboard. If you look down at the keyboard in front of you, you see that the top row of letters, starting on the left, begins with Q, Q-W-E-R-T-Y, and that's how it got its name, the QWERTY keyboard. He patented his typewriter, and he sold the patent eventually to the Remington Arms Company, famous manufacturer of revolvers and other rifles and other implements. He sold that patent for $12,000, which would be about $435,000 in today's money. So he did pretty well for himself with that effort. And Remington was in a particularly well situated to begin producing the typewriter. Now, as I said, Remington was a gun manufacturer. The Remington and Sons started producing guns in the very early 1800s and eventually turned that into a company. You see on the right there, their early factory around 1840, but Remington also began creating or producing sewing machines. And so this was a company, they introduced their first sewing machine in about 1870, and they were very comfortable with the system of producing these cast iron and other types of metal tools in a production system that got going pretty quickly so that they could turn these out to meet the demand. And demand was growing for guns and sewing machines. And so Remington was doing pretty well for themselves. And then Sholes came along in about 1873 or so, and actually just a little before perhaps. And so Remington, when Sholes sold his patent to Remington, they took it on full bore, forgive the gun pun there, and began producing its first commercial typewriter in March 1873. Now, that was the Remington Model 1. And they wanted to tell the world they were continuing to produce this and get it out there, but they wanted the whole world to know. And so they distributed, they had a booth at the 1900 Paris Exposition where they produced this typewriter demonstration, allowed people to try them out, send letters home, and so on. And lots of people began to see what this typewriter could do. As a result, the use of the typewriter around the world continued to grow. You see some poster stamps here. These are die-cut poster stamps for the Remington Company in the shape of a seal. And the one on the left in red became their company logo. I love the motto around the top there: to save time is to lengthen life. And their message was, this typewriter is a time-saving device, and the time you save improves your quality of life. As they grew around the world, you see another, the same poster stamp, but you'll notice you may be struggling to read it, and that's because it's in Hungarian. So they continued to produce typewriters and make them available around the world. I love this later poster stamp, an Empire product, Remington noiseless typewriter. This was by far, this was closer to 30s, 40s, as it became, as the typewriter began to continue to evolve. And in the bottom here is a Swedish poster stamp. It translates to read, the traveler, the farmer, and the grocer all have great use for the Remington Model J. And so this was again, a typewriter that now could be used in lots of places. You cannot see it on camera. I have a wonderful old Royal typewriter from about 1920 sitting on a table here, and it's like a cast iron doorstop. It weighs about 40 pounds. It's really heavy. And so one of the wonderful evolutions of these typewriters is they got smaller and lighter and more mobile. So the field, of course, of competition was growing. Remington wasn't the only one producing typewriters, and other companies began in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They wanted a piece of that marketing pie. You see the Smith Premier typewriter on which produced typewriters from about 1889 to 1940. This shows a Smith Premier #2. Now this cover was canceled. You see the back stamp here in 1896. There were some innovations that this particular typewriter brought about. Notice here the space bar at the bottom of the keyboard, and that it's a single bar. Now that doesn't seem unusual to us, although you'll notice it's quite long, took up almost the whole width of the keyboard. Ours is much shorter now, but even the single space bar was an innovation, because the earlier version of their typewriter had 2 space bars separated by a few inches, and they were on either side of the bottom row of the typewriter keyboard. So this single space bar was an innovation. This typewriter, you'll notice that you can see the paper, but the keys are back here behind it. So it's producing type, but the type is not visible to the typist. That means that the keys are hitting somewhere else that the typist cannot see as they are typing. And it takes several lines of type for the paper to roll up enough to see that first line of typed paper, that typed message, which means that you were well into the letter by the time you saw the first of your typing. So if you made a mistake at the beginning, you went a long way before you discovered it. That was a problem, but it was a problem that other companies fixed. This is the Monarch Visible. They call it visible because they moved the location of the keys to what we now expect to see on a typewriter. The keys are in front of the paper and they're striking right there, so the typist can see the strike, see what they're typing, and if they've made a mistake, they know right away, as opposed to waiting for several lines to transpire before they see it. So this was a big innovation. This was a 1906 commercial cover, but I also really love this promotional postcard because it also talked about the represented an innovation of typewriters. The typist says, "Tired at 3 o'clock? No, sir, I use the Monarch." They were talking about how easy it was to use, that I had more longevity at work because I wasn't exhausted by the equipment. And so that was good news for employees. That was also good news for business owners and managers who wanted their office to be efficient. So as I mentioned, many typewriters began to come along from many parts of the world, and they're represented here by some poster stamps that you see from different countries. I love the poster stamps because they're designed to be a marketing tool. They're not postage, but they look like stamps, and they went on covers to as an extra way to promote a product. And so the typewriter industry in general and specific companies really embrace the poster stamp. You see several here. I have in my collection more than 170 poster stamps with typewriters on them. I had no idea. And there are more. I've identified some out there that I haven't been able to get my hands on, and who knows how many that I haven't ever seen. But it's been kind of fun to keep looking for these. Now, so let's talk, as we've talked about the commercialization of the typewriter and that early typewriter and how it innovated. But let's talk for a minute about how the typewriter changed communication. You see on the left a postcard that really shows how communication changed in wartime, because, and this was an Oliver typewriter being depicted right here on the front lines, where a sergeant or a lieutenant or whoever was in charge in this area could dictate communication that could be typed on site and then messaged out to back to headquarters or wherever. And it made a big difference in establishing a field office in wartime, but establishing the typewriter as an effective communication tool in war. A later example of that is another innovation. And what you're seeing here on the right is called a folded typewriter postcard. This was an innovation that came along because businesses realized that a typed message to a customer was efficient. But, it took a while to put in a piece of paper, maybe carbon paper, type the letter, fold it, put it in a separate envelope on which you have also typed the address so that somebody can receive it. You're stamping the envelope and blah, blah, blah. You go through all of this. It takes a while, especially if you have a lot of them to do. The folded typewriter postcard was one piece of paper. It was heavier than regular weight of paper, but light enough that it could still go into the platen of the typewriter and be typed upon. And it was either an individual piece or it could be printed in a stream of these that could just continually roll through the platen, and you type one after another and keep going with them. You separate them. They're pre-folded, ready to fold. They've already got adhesive on them. You seal it and send it. Now, this one caught my eye because of the message and the era. This is printed for this particular company. So you see here the company name. This is a German company, Kulze and Company, United Color Weaving. So they were fabric manufacturers. And this postcard or folded typewriter card is written to a customer in the middle of World War II. And it's bad news about this prospective customer's order. It translates to this: we've received your request on May 26th, but we unfortunately cannot promise you delivery, as we have no manufacturing instructions for civilians. We're currently only employed for the Wehrmacht. Heil Hitler. Yeah, note the date, the 28th of January, 1943, right in the middle of the war. They were busy producing uniforms for the Wehrmacht, so they were not taking orders for other commercial customers. Here is an example of a typed letter that shows that the typewriter also impacted communication on the war front by service personnel who were trying to reach out to family and friends at home and keep them apprised, let them know that they're okay, and sometimes make a request for favorite foods from mom or whoever in the next care package. This particular letter, written by Chester Kiesling to his mother in New Jersey. And he shared the scuttlebutt of his unit and talked about a variety of things, but he also had some important news. He shared that the word he was getting, that he soon might be heading home. Well, guess what? He was right. And if you notice the postmark on this particular cover, August 14th, 1945, it became known as World War II's unofficial ending date. He was right. He was headed home. The Korean War also saw communication. And what we're seeing now is that the typewriter was the accepted way for businesses, and in this case, government, to communicate with customers, with vendors, and with constituents. You know, when the earliest typewriters came along and they were trying to promote these as a business tool, some business owners didn't want anything to do with them because they were insulted. They felt that what the vendor, the typewriter seller, was saying is, my handwriting isn't good enough to be read easily by customers, so I need a typewriter. Of course, that wasn't the way it was. These were efficient, effective, faster, and easy, and truly easier to read for the person receiving the message. In this case, this is a letter from then Senator Lyndon Johnson, later US President Lyndon Johnson, to one of his constituents. He was allaying the fears of this father about the potential induction of his son. The news was good. It didn't seem likely that that would be happening. But I especially loved this because you see here on the right, in the right-hand corner of the cover, Senator Johnson signs the letter. That's the franking, because of course, the postage for senators and their ilk was free. So all he did was sign it and it went through the mail. Here's one last letter related to home. And I share this because this is an example of a very early typewritten letter. This letter was dated November 29th, 1883. And it's a letter from Isaac Alden Pond. He was the owner, as you can see from the corner card of the commercial cover, I.A. Pond and Groceries and Provisions. And he is typing this letter to a nephew. Now, the reason I'm particularly interested in is sharing family stories and asking questions. But what interested me, the reason I picked this up, is because in the letter, he actually talks about using the typewriter and his experience with it. And at one point in the letter, he says to his nephew, "This typewriting machine was given to me by Mr. Clarence G. Harmon, and it cost $125. He said, I have not written very little on it, but I think I will get more used to it and I shall like it very much." And at the end, this close-up of the end of the letter that you see here on the bottom of the screen, Pond tried out every key. He was still experimenting with this typewriter. So you see he's typed all of the keys several times. He's typed on both sides of this piece of paper. So this faint part in the middle is bleed through from the other side. But another thing I want you to note is that you see, for example, right here where he tells his nephew, "Write soon," notice that all the letters are capital letters. That's not because he kept the shift lock key down. It's because these early typewriters only typed in all caps. That was one of the characteristics of the earliest typewriters. It was a later innovation that you had the option of upper and lowercase letters. So this actually is the final letter. Again, with the monarch visible. This particular letter excited me because of its particular situation. This was a monarch typewriter sales representative, and he was pitching the sale of typewriters to a telegraph operator in Massachusetts. And by way of credentials, he told him in this letter that the company had just provided 65 Monarch visible typewriters for the Western Union Telegraph Company of San Francisco. so that all of their operators would have new typewriters. Why did they need new typewriters? Well, in this letter, he said, we're providing them to the San Francisco operators who, quote, lost their effects in the recent disaster. If you note the date here, July 11th, 1906, less than 3 months after the San Francisco earthquake and fire. So this particular company recognized that typewriters were needed to be regenerated in the community of San Francisco, because in a disaster like this and its aftermath, speedy communication was essential. And so that became also a marketing tool for saying, you know, if it's important in this time of crisis, shouldn't you own these typewriters as well? Now, typewriters represented a hallmark in technology, a cutting edge tool. And this particular picture comes from, well, it's from a book, which I've cited here, Technology in the Hospital, Transforming Patient Care in the Early 20th Century. The author, Howell, shared this picture, which was first produced in a 1925 annual report for the Pennsylvania hospital. Now, you see a picture of an administrative office in this hospital, and here, front and center, in the foreground, is this typewriter. Well, why would they put that in a hospital annual report? Well, the reason is pretty simple. That was considered cutting-edge technology, and the idea was, if we're using cutting-edge technology in our administrative office, imagine what a great job we're doing in the operation theater. Typewriters evolved and eventually were replaced by computers, but they continue to a degree. I mean, there are some advantages to typewriters today. If the power goes out, you can still use it. If your internet's down, you can still use it. And you can take them into the jungle or wherever you go where you don't need an extension cord. But we see typewriters today on stamps in ways that represent social change and other things. So you see 3 stamps here, Seychelles, Brunei, and Cuba, showing, here's a stylized typewriter on this stamp commemorating the International Literacy Year. This stamp, the Decade of the Disabled, so a Braille typewriter. And here in the lower right-hand corner of this stamp, the anniversary of the creation of special ed, showing a typewriter class. Other typewriters on stamps reflected typewriters that aid those in special needs, and both in philately and ephemera. So Braille typewriters here, and on this Japanese first day cover with the hand-drawn Braille typewriter. This very early postcard shows a typewriter, they call it a specially arranged machine for a soldier from World War I who came home sightless and with only one hand, but could continue to communicate through the creation of this special typing machine. And down here is a ticket from a lottery, a Spanish lottery, where the proceeds would benefit the National Organization of Spanish Blind People. And it features a typewriter on that particular ticket. Typewriters also show up on stamps representing authors. You'll recognize Mark Twain, real name Samuel Clemens. Twain is recognized by scholars as the first author to submit a typewritten manuscript. The truth is, Mark Twain hated the typewriter. He saw one in a store window, bought it immediately, began playing with it, and decided it was the devil incarnate, and he gave it away. That doesn't mean he didn't continued to submit typewritten manuscripts. He just had other people type for him, and he continued to write in longhand. So each of these stamps represent authors from various types of publications and show them with their typewriters, which I love. So not only do typewriters on stamps today represent social change and communication per se, as well as writing and authors, but they have become, as you see here, semantic icons for communication. This Singapore 2021 issue from a series of greetings stamps just has this happy typewriter with the message, hello. I love that. The second one is one of my favorite typewriter stamps from a series, a mini sheet from Belgium featuring 5 typewriter stamps of different eras, and this one representing romantic communication at the typewriter. This third one doesn't have a typewriter, but it shows the type of font, Courier, that became synonymous with typewriters. And it is about writing. This particular passage here is from this Polish stamp. It reads, Jeno, take the painful glass out of my eyes, the image of the days when the white skulls are rolled by the burning lakes of blood. That's kind of hairy stuff, right? The stamp honors Krzysztof Kamil Basinski. He was a poet and a Polish resistance fighter against German occupation in World War II. He was killed at just age 23. He was a sniper and somebody shot him. Well, he was an infantryman and a German sniper shot him. But his emotive voice would have been lost forever. But he had the wherewithal before he went into service to give a copy of all of the poetry and essays he had written to a friend. And the friend was smart enough to hide them away until the war ended. And as a result, his voice continues in the literary canon. And this final stamp here from Colombia was from 2020, really produced during COVID and talking about COVID. But what I love about this is it depicts this old typewriter and the keys, all the letters from the keys are floating up. And I like to see it as creating this circle that sort of blocks out COVID, keeps us safe. And it says, reescribe su historia, write your own story. And if nothing else, that is the power that the typewriter produced for mankind, for the world. And that was the ability to write your own story. And that is my story of typewriter philately. Thank you for sharing with me.
Thank you, Michelle. That was superb. Perhaps we could show our appreciation to Michelle in the usual manner.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Very good.
While everybody else is thinking of their questions, perhaps I could ask you one first. Do you have any idea of the numbers involved? Say, at the Paris Exposition, what sort of number of typewriters were they producing around then?
You know, just before that exposition, the first typewriters, in the first, say, 4 years, they created about 4,000. By just before the Paris Exposition, they estimate 140,000 typewriters were being produced. Now that's 125 years ago. Of course, once it caught on, everybody wanted one, and lots of people were producing them, and different companies were producing them in multiple countries. So, and then we don't even get into the advent of the portable typewriter, but that became marketed as a typewriter you send with your child to university, or you take on the go on business trips. And so there became many reasons to have multiple typewriters, one at home and one on the road, just like a desktop and a laptop computer, same kind of version with typewriters.
Grand, thank you. Right, any questions for Michele? If somebody waved their hand at me, I might just see you.
Can I make a comment, perhaps? First of all, I liked a wonderful presentation, and I liked your story, Michele, about how you started getting into typewriters, because I have exactly the same story in that my father had a typewriter at home. He and my mother would often go out for shows and so on, and I started playing with the typewriter, learned how to use it, not touch typing, but fast two-finger typing, and then impressed people by typing all my school notes up. So it's a similar story. But what I wanted to say was, as far as the philatelic side is concerned, I collect patents as a theme. That's one of the themes that I collect. And I hadn't really paid attention to the patents which were responsible for the development of typewriters. And you have incentivized me to now go on to eBay and places like that and chase some of the items that you've got in your collection to add to my collection. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Charles. Let the buying begin.
Okay. I think you had your hand waving, Grace.
Yeah, it's just a very little question. In the beginning, very early on, Michele, on your page of ephemera, you had an advert inside a stamp booklet, but I thought they counted as philatelic because they were in the booklet.
Oh,
I don't know if it's different with the Technical Association, but Wendy will know. Wendy.
Well, Barry will know. Go on, Barry.
Yeah, they would be philatelic in that context.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay, I'm gonna have to switch out that slide. I'll use it somewhere else.
It's only useful if you're exhibiting. For something like that, it doesn't matter at all. But I know I've got an early booklet advertising page in an exhibit, and the judge liked it. So, yeah, okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you for calling my attention to that, because I had it wrong and I would like it to be correct. So thank you very much.
It might not be wrong in the States. Are the rules the same in the States? I don't know.
Anyway,
it was just a...
It depends whether you're exhibiting or whether it's a display. Yeah. I mean, I think if it's in, and Barry being a judge will know, I think if it's in an exhibit, you wouldn't take the one page, the advertising page, out of the booklet, because you want the whole booklet to prove it's the whole thing. Is that right?
Yes, you can.
You can.
In my exhibit, I had a sheet taken out of a booklet.
Okay.
And the judge never criticised it. So
there you go.
That's good to know. It would be hard to put the whole booklet and to show the one page, because the booklet contained several ads and they were all for different things.
Yeah, so it's difficult.
To show the one page.
With those really thick sewed booklets, how do you do it otherwise? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was Jean Alexander. My thanks to her. She was the one that led me to, I never even heard of exploded booklets. I didn't know what she was talking about. And there it is, this awesome typewriter ad. I've found another one since, Jean, by the way. Just bid on it today, because I thought that was a lovely way to also show the typewriter and how it was changing. So thank you.
Can I come in? I've often seen both booklet panes with the adverts, and also the adverts singly or in a booklet, in exhibits, and it depends how it's presented and what the advert is about, and if it's appropriate to the theme. I think that's the main point.
Sounds like the jury's still out.
Okay, Wendy.
Yeah, Michele, thanks for a fascinating talk. It was really interesting on something I knew nothing about. One thing that struck me, the early inventors were all men, which is, very understandable. And the very early illustrations you showed were men using them. And then at around 1900, suddenly all the illustrations were women using them. Does this tell us something about the jobs that were available?
It does. And it really, I have several postcards that show business schools, and it's a picture of a room full of typewriters at desks with women learning to type, because this became an entree into the working field. There are other women. There was one woman, and Michael Blackman is the one who clued me in on this. Michael, maybe you could share the story, because Michael specialized, his work was in patents, and he knew a story about a woman involved in a patent with the typewriter. Michael, maybe you could tell us more.
I could if I could remember it.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We had this in a conversation, and I unfortunately didn't write it down. I was going to go back and say, all right, I got to find this out, because I think it was a woman scientist that also had some connection to the typewriter invention in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to track
that.
Have to
follow that up.
Well, yeah, you follow that up and let's talk again.
Yeah, wonderful display. Wonderful display, Michelle. Very much enjoyed it. And of course, I saw it on your ATA display as well. So I've enjoyed it twice. Excellent.
Any other questions for Michelle? I'm not seeing any hands wave vigorously at me. No. Okay, your last chance. Okay, thank you, Michelle. That really was very good. I really enjoyed that, and my typewriter knowledge has gone up tremendously. So thank you very much. And I do recall I do have a small portable typewriter which is collecting dust upstairs, but I think I'll stick to the QWERTY keyboard in front of me, I think.